Hi guys, welcome to the Social Block. As usual, it's me, Maggie, and today our episode is about women in crypto. It's as simple as that. It's a huge topic. Our guest is Amanda Wick. She's CEO and founder of the Association for Women in Crypto. Amanda has a really rich career behind her. She was the chief of legal affairs at Chainalysis. She was a federal prosecutor at the US Department of Justice, and she was also a senior policy advisor at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So that's a really big deal. That's a huge topic. So I really hope that gets you really excited about this episode. Right before we start, I want to quickly ask you to like and subscribe to this episode and to our YouTube channel as well. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts as well. That really helps us keep the podcast running. And since we have had a few suggested topics, but we want to get more, if you guys want to quickly fill out this survey, we've prepared it specially for you so that we get an idea of what you like about the podcast, what you don't like, and how we can make it better for you. Right? And without further ado, let's get into our episode. If you want, we can get started. I was going to ask you how you're doing today to start off a little bit.
Oh, I'm great. And I blocked off like a huge chunk of time. So hopefully, I think you said it would go to like 11:15 or something, but I actually have time after that. So whatever you need, I'm here for it.
Yay. Awesome. So we don't have to rush and we can just start going. So obviously this episode is going to be about women in crypto because Amanda is the CEO and founder of the Association for Women in Crypto. And I wanted to start with like a really basic kind of talking about women in the workforce in the crypto and blockchain space. Up until 2019, it was only like 4 to 6% of women of crypto employees were women. And I wanted to ask you what you think the reasons for that are and how crypto can actually, and blockchain, of course, more broadly, can actually fight this like big kind of, I guess, lack of diversity in our employment, in our workforce, because I believe it starts there, being more inclusive and having more women in crypto starts from the workforce.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm biased in that answer in terms of, I think some of it is providing a support system for women that are in the industry, right? So about a year ago, I started the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, and the name is somewhat limited, but it's actually women and male allies, or I guess women in support of allies in crypto, blockchain, and Web3. And part of what we hear over and over and over is that it helps for women to be able to talk to other women, right? And frankly, some of our male allies enjoy coming to a safe space where they can also kind of express their frustration and their fear and their concerns. I will say the question that's really interesting is, why are there less women in crypto and how do we get more women in crypto? And I actually was talking with a C-suite executive at a crypto company whose wife works at one of the major tech companies. And he said he was trying to get her into crypto. I think she's been at like IBM or something for a decade. And I said, it's actually really hard because historically, statistically, women just tend to veer away from riskier fields, right? They've done studies on entrepreneurship, why there was less women entrepreneurs starting their own companies, starting their own businesses. And for whatever reasons, we could spend probably an entire hour talking about the aspects of certain societies that make women make women more risk averse, right? Or assess risk differently. People have said it in a lot of different ways.
That's like a whole sociological study on its own.
Exactly. And you could spend a bunch of time looking at that and all of the downsides to deconditioning risk or disincentivizing women from taking risks. But it definitely permeates in that if you already have an industry that's kind of renowned for not being female friendly, i.e. tech, and then you add onto that the layer of crypto blockchain, whose history of crypto bros and the nature of, right, it being more perceived as being more risky, now you have an environment that frankly is in some ways harder to get women to get into in the first place.
Yeah, I totally agree with the thing with the tech, because I think like only about a quarter of tech employees are women. So like that's
I'm so impressed.
Stat. I'm loaded today. And then like you have even like less than that, like 5 times less than that in crypto. And I guess what you said is like it's the risk averse mentality. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Like, I think I have a separate question or anything going. So keep listening, guys. Don't give up. But yeah, women are also notoriously underrepresented in STEM from like even like an education level. So I think that it's just kind of like this problem that keeps layering onto itself, like the deeper, and crypto is just like the last level of that layer. So I think that like that's one of the reasons, but I also think that it's a modeling issue to some extent, because I was looking at, it was an interview from Marique Flament from the Near Foundation, and it was for Forecast like about a year ago. And she kept repeating in this interview, you cannot be what you cannot see. And I know that's a little bit simplistic because you can be something that you've never seen before, but I think I get what she meant. You know, she was just kind of like, it's very difficult to picture yourself, like say as a CEO of a crypto company, if you just never see that, because it's a subconscious thing. And I mean, I think that's a huge reason for like this big imbalance in crypto. But then I also think that besides it's like the technological abilities blockchain gives that might be a little bit more accessible, and we'll get to that, there's like just the novelty of the industry that gives us huge potential, because tech is already very established. It's so big, and we're already, you know, playing by the rules of the white man, to say the least. And crypto is still a baby. We can still give it multiple like female employees that can shape it so that when it's big enough, it's actually women friendly. What do you make of that?
Well, there was a ton in there. I want to pick out like a couple of pieces. So the first thing I want to pick out is the thing that you said for the woman from Near, that if you can't be what you can't see. Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with that. And what's really funny to me about this is that one of the reasons why we encourage men constantly to come to our events. I actually personally invite men in the crypto blockchain space whenever we have an event, because some of them have told me, I thought it was the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, so I didn't think I would want it. And I'm like, no, it's an association to advocate for greater inclusion of women, but you're 50% or more of the solution. Like realistically, women are not going to complain and support our way together out of this. Men are absolutely essential to helping us with this. But the interesting thing about the quote is when I try to explain that to men, and they're it's very difficult for them to empathize because they look around and they see men. They don't know what it's like to not see themselves. Oh yeah. But when I give them this example and I say, look, the first time that you did a box jump, right? And a lot of them like understand what a box jump is a big thing in CrossFit. Yeah. The first time you did a box jump, my coach, I don't know about their coaches, but it's a very big thing. You have to visualize yourself being able to jump up on that box, because if you can't see it, you can't do it. And this is actually something that resonates with them, because it's really not about it's about how your brain works. Your brain works in the way that if you really can't visualize something happening, you doubt that it can happen, and it impacts everything. And the minute that a guy kind of says, oh, yeah, and they've slammed their knees into a box, like because they didn't think, but as soon as they can visualize actually jumping that high and getting on top of the box, and they get on top of the box, and I'm like, that getting on top of the box, that's all we're asking for, is put a couple of women on a panel, include women in your opportunities, just let women see that it absolutely makes an impact. And it's not that men don't want to see this. It's that you can't ask people to see something that they've never experienced unless you can put it into a perspective that they have experienced. Mm-hmm. And so when people say like the world needs more empathy, I'm like, oh, absolutely. But you need to help people find that empathy and help them find a situation that they identify with. Because for men, not being able to do what they don't see, most of them don't, unless they're nurses. Most of them don't know what a word.
Oh, I have a really good example for this as well. I love to dance, and like couples dancing, and it's really like notoriously there's so little men, and it's because, you know, little girls, they grow up with this image of the ballerina, the ballroom dancer, this beautiful woman in dresses dancing gracefully, being very feminine, whereas men, like how often do you see like banners of a male ballet dancer? Like never. And they're very masculine.
Wasn't this an entire musical? Billy Elliot?
Maybe. I don't know.
Isn't this what Billy Elliot? There was There was an entire musical about a little boy, Billy Elliot, who I think wants to be a
Probably.
dancer.
Yeah, it's the same
It's
thing.
literally all about
Yeah,
your
you
point.
just you never have that example. So you just don't picture yourself, and it leads to like the systemic less of this gender in this sport, in this industry, and everything. So
I will tell you, just to pick on that one more thing, because you had so many good nuggets in that question. There's a really terrifying rise right now in the United States. There's a legal group that is bringing lawsuits to prevent activities like, giving grants to Black-owned businesses. And it's basically fighting people who are trying to provide equity. So like, we want intentional inclusion. That means offering opportunities to women that you would have otherwise offered to men exactly for that reason, because it's been all men. You have to give some opportunities to women to actually move the needle. And these legal challenges are probably the most like terrifying thing from a literally setting equality back, because we will not get equality without equity. And it's a really terrifying trend in the United States right now, because if you do not recognize, to your point, if you don't recognize the need to fix what was in the past and put people in possessions that they can see, to give people to put people at the same point in the starting line, because you've put them miles behind, we'll never get equality. And that's something that a lot of us are watching in the US that's quite terrifying.
Yeah. I think like even just and like, at Nexo, where I've been working for the last 4 years, like we have this thing, like it's going hard. Like last year we did a bit of a census about, what percentage of our employees are women and what percentage are in leadership roles. And we had like 32% of our employees as women, which for crypto, we were looking at this and we were just like, we're doing really good. We were really proud of ourselves. And like HR was just like, we should totally, talk about this. And I was like, yeah, we should. And then we looked later and we're like, that same number, that same percentage was replicated in our women in leadership roles. So right now we've got a female CPO, Elisa Taskova. Like when she got promoted, I remember I texted her, I was so excited because I was just like, this is the kind of like intentional effort. And she was totally, the person to choose for this. And we all knew it. And, but it just makes me so happy that like, people are actually, being represented. I feel represented by her. I feel represented by, the head of Nexo Ventures, who's also a woman. And it just, yeah, I feel like my company does really good at like that. Intentional is the word that you said that just really resonates with me, because we're not going to get anywhere if we don't put in some effort.
I think one of the real disservices that people do is, I would bet both of my kidneys that the woman that you're talking about is exceptionally qualified.
Oh,
and the thing that drives me crazy is when people think that intentional inclusion, and we have a huge problem with this with the affirmative action legacies in the United States. People think that intentional inclusion means taking underqualified people and putting them into a position simply because they're in that minority group, women, people of color,
and it's not that it's exactly
so
the opposite of that. Yeah.
It is literally so not that. And it's so enraging, because I'm like, if you take a look at it, and I hear this from women too, which is actually terrifying. Well, I don't want to be asked to speak because I'm a woman. I don't want to be offered the position because I'm a woman. And I literally want to smack them and say, stop it, because you're qualified and your competitor is qualified. But unconscious bias is going to take those equal qualifications and is going to make it harder for you. This is how unconscious bias works. It's not somebody sitting there saying we should not hire the woman and we should hire the dude. It's that the human mind goes for the ones that they know that look like them. So if you're hired because you're a woman, literally all that did was give you an equal shot at being a qualified candidate and actually getting the position.
Exactly.
And I will tell you, I've seen people, like maybe a woman flubs on stage and she says something like, she's not perfect. And then somebody says, well, this is what happens when you bring in the women speakers. And I'm like, we don't literally call out every mediocre male who makes a mistake and says, well, this is what happens when you bring in the men. Can you imagine? But one woman can, like, everybody takes like the woman as if she's representative of the whole. And people do that for people of color too. They do that for minority groups. And people don't realize what unconscious bias is. And it's literally a toxic poison that's preventing equality. And we have to intentionally leach the poison out.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of going back to leadership roles as well, I read really interestingly that for the crypto industry, we are slowly beginning to hire more women. So, we are kind of getting there. But actually, it's rising a lot. Like, women in leadership roles are actually becoming more and more, like, proportionally a lot more than just women who are employed in crypto. So I wonder, like, what do you make of that? Because I can't kind of figure out for the life of me why we're getting, well, actually, I do have a theory. But I wanted to ask you first why you think women in leadership roles in crypto are rising so much right now compared to just women who are employed in the general crypto workforce.
Well, I'm so curious about your theory, but I'll say mine and then you tell me yours, okay?
No, you go first.
So my theory is, and actually there was an article that I think the Block or Law 360 did about this, where my theory is that FTX was frankly the greatest thing to happen to crypto. For years, women had been kind of flying the flag of, look, this is amazing technology and there are incredible things that you can do with this, but you cannot move that fast and break things in financial services. And you had a bunch of tech bros who then who came over into fintech and wanted to pretend that the fin part wasn't in fintech. And you can't mess around with financial services that way, right? A lot of DeFi wants to pretend that the fi isn't finance, like it's decentralized finance, right? Like the fi part matters. And so you had women who were kind of like canaries in a coal mine saying, look, this is not going the way, this is not going to go the way that you want it to go. These things that you're claiming aren't securities are likely going to be securities. You need safety and soundness. You need controls. You need sound financial management.
Yeah,
and when
totally.
FTX fell, FTX isn't a crypto problem. FTX is a financial mismanagement problem. And women tend to be the people who identify these risks and flag these risks. And so now you start to see, like, as a industry matures, guess who tends to be the people that you want to nurture and shape things and grow them into high functioning, productive adult companies? The people who have largely been responsible for nurturing and shaping humans into becoming high functioning, productive humans. It's a skill set that transfers. And so it's funny how you see a lot of companies that are, Elliptic is a great example of this, right? Simone Maney is freaking brilliant. And it drives me crazy that a lot of times, if you ask people who are the CEOs in the blockchain analytics space, they can name Groninger, they can name Jevons, they can name Stefan at TRM Labs, but they cannot name Simone, even though she is a genius. She is brilliant. She is like a machine with facts. She knows this area cold, and they should all be common household names if you're going to know somebody in blockchain analytics. And for some reason, they're not. And this is what we need to change, because she is, frankly, more qualified, right? Than some, like, just as, if not more qualified. But but there's this thing in crypto, and we've got to figure out what that is so that all of the brilliant people who are important in this space are equally as known.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of hit my theory right on the nose there, because I was going to say the exact same thing. I was like, 2022 is what has brought more women into leadership roles. And I think, like, that's largely also, like, I mean, Nexo survived. Yes. And that's because of proper risk management. Like I was just like blue in the face repeating this to journalists as a PR, talking about proper risk management, all of, the things that we do. And I think it's because we actually do include the opinions of people who have, like, basically really strong spidey senses for risk in the way we function, aka women, and also a lot of them. And like, I don't want to, like, in any way say that my male colleagues are not absolutely exceptional, because they also are. But so that was exactly my thing, is like 2022 and all of the companies that fell, the crypto bros. Yeah, canaries in a coal mine. That's just like, yeah.
I'm very excited that I guessed it.
Yeah.
It felt like some pressure. So I was like, well, what if I get it wrong?
It wasn't, this is not an exam. But actually, the actual statistic here for, like, the risk averseness of women it's pretty sharp, because it's like over 40%, like 44-45% of women are worried about like risks in crypto, its volatility and all these things, compared to somewhere between 25 and 28% of men. So it's almost double the amount of women are likely to sound the alarm on something going wrong in terms of like the financial risks of crypto rather than men. And it's not just financial risks. In general, women are more risk averse. So
fun fact about that. It translates. People think it's crypto and it's not. It's the risk aspect, because I work with some amazing women. Nisa Amoyles in New York. She's a venture capitalist. She's been trying to raise funds. There's a ton of women's groups. Paige at K Street Capital in DC. There are women who've been trying to get women into the asset class of venture capital. And there's a lot of focus, and I know we're going to talk about the really low rate of funding that goes to female founded companies, right? And there's a lot of attention on that right now, which is great. But there's not as much attention on the few number of women who qualify, especially in the United States, who qualify as accredited investors who aren't involved in the asset class that is venture capital. They're not angel investors. They don't participate in funds. They financially can, but they choose not to. And I've seen this firsthand where a woman will say, it just seems too risky, like betting on a company. And what if you lose, right? And some funds will lower their investment rates to as low as $10,000, which is crazy low for venture. And a woman will say no. And then she'll walk across the street and buy a Louis Vuitton handbag for $10,000 that her kid could puke on the next day and literally render valueless. And you're like, okay, we need to talk about your risk assessment strategies. But it's very difficult to fix things if the people who are making the decisions about the funding are all men. So we can talk about how little funding is going to women, but we also need to talk about how little input of where that funding is coming from women.
Yeah, which kind of leads us into this like very specific trend of women as crypto investors, because there's quite little information. You know, there have been quite a few studies done, but they tend to be far in the past. Like I would have expected a lot more people to be following the gender dynamics among investors and, you know, having some insights on this. But there was 4 main trends that I kind of noticed reading like a bunch of studies about female investors. And the first one was a tendency to HODL. So women seem to be more long-term investors. Then there was the more extensive researching aspect. We already talked about the risk. That's number 3. And then the last one was the confidence gap. Like that's what I've termed it, the confidence gap. That like despite researching more, having more long-term strategies, and also I would say according to, there was an S&P study, S&P Global Market Study from 2019 that showed that companies with like women on their board of directors actually largely outperformed other companies financially, which I thought was really, really cool. And I was like, yes. But, you know, so technically women or women's inclusion, like trading and like investment decisions actually outperforms, you know, the sole male perspective. But then there's this like complete lack of confidence. So, I mean, I guess, what do you make of like, investment trends among women in crypto? And what do you think crypto could do for women as investors? Because I think it could have like a positive impact on socially empowering them.
Well, so here's where it gets really like nuanced and very like important to kind of thread the needle. We are not an enthusiast group. Like my association is a professional association. And I tell people all the time, I'm actually crypto agnostic in the sense that if you like, we don't give financial advice, we don't give legal advice, right? There are groups for that. I remember, I think BFF was a big one that came out. There was Crypto Babes, like SheFi was a really good one that did massive education. I mean, like if there's a woman who asks me about getting into crypto, I literally just send them to SheFi and Magy Love because she does such fantastic education about the getting into like understanding it and getting it into the investment side. We don't do that. And I don't like to reinvent the wheel when somebody's made a fantastic wheel.
Yeah.
The issue
crypto,
there
blockchain, the whole industry.
Crypto, like when you're talking, so we use the word crypto loosely, right? And it covers so many things. But those are very different things, right? Like if you're investing in blockchain technology or cryptography-based technology, that could be, you know, doing carbon offsets. It could be, you know, tokenizing assets. It could be, you know, NFT technology that's replacing deed offices, right? Like there are so many use cases that people don't pay attention to that are in the investment space. And a lot of people, they just say crypto and they think of Bitcoin, ETH, crap coins, Doge, like all right. That is such a small subset of what the industry of digital assets is. And so when people are like, well, I'm thinking about getting into crypto, I'm like, what are you talking? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. What are you thinking of investing in and how? Because you can actually invest in blockchain through like a very TradFi method. Like you could literally just have like, I don't know, Coinbase stocks. That counts because you've invested in a crypto company, but like you're invested in stocks essentially.
Yeah. I mean, when I open my Coinbase account, that's exactly what it looks like. It would look just like an E-Trade account, right? I'm not a day trader on E-Trade. I think I would be a hodler under your definition, just because.
I just think that women, when they buy something, there's like, I don't really know any women who are like super whack day traders or something. There's like, I want to buy something sustainable that like, I mean, they definitely exist. But I think it's a little rare.
Oh, I know some. And there are some. Yeah. And there are some on Twitter. Like, I think you tend to find that on crypto Twitter.
Yeah.
We have a running standing joke. You've got crypto Twitter and then crypto LinkedIn. And these two worlds are very different. There are some people who straddle it. There's a woman, Dumpling, Bullish Dumpling. I love her. She works with Coin Bureau. She's like one of my straddlers, like the crypto LinkedIn, crypto Twitter world. It's a tough world to straddle because like on one side, you've got crypto Twitter that's like, ooh. And at the furthest side, I think a lot of people would say that furthest side of crypto Twitter is not doing the industry any favors. And then you have like the other side, which is like the extreme of crypto LinkedIn, where frankly, it's like a lot of people just screaming the entire thing is Ponzi scheme and they're not educated or nuanced either, right? And in between are the people like me who are screaming, can we have an objective, fact-based, nuanced conversation about what is and what isn't, and just kind of leave the sound bites at home? Because it's not doing anybody any good on either side, right? But getting back to your question, you know, I jokingly, like, I don't give people investment advice ever. I personally treat it like if I walked in and put money on red or black, right? Like if you're comparing it to risks, and it's the same, frankly, as like when I'm angel investing. It's a little bit different because I think you can pick with angel, and actually it's not, because with angel investing, you're picking a company and you're saying, I think you have the potential to do something incredible based on your product, right? I think a lot of people invest in Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, right? Because they believe in those coins. And some of the other ones, I think it was Algorand. I met the head of the foundation, and he was so great that I was like, I would support you in the world that you want to live in. So I think it really depends on what you're doing. Are you treating it like gambling, day trading, et cetera, or are you investing in because you believe in the product and the future that they see in? And I think those are very different questions. And I think men and women do look at those questions very differently.
Well, yeah, because if you're a woman, like this is like my take on things. Like as a woman, like what am I looking for? Because I'm not really looking to gamble. Like that doesn't feel like that's the world that I want to live in. I'm looking for, okay, how can the world be more inclusive to me? How can I invest in something that's going to make the world better for me, for my daughter, so that when she goes out into the world and wants to invest, people don't look at her like you. Because I think this is where like we move away from like crypto investment and we think about investing in blockchain, because the technology itself, I think, can really shield women from a lot of the unconscious bias that we're experiencing. Like even if you think about the fact that it's mostly pseudonymous, I don't want to say anonymous because wallets are more pseudonymous than they are anonymous. And then you have like ZK, that like if zero knowledge becomes a thing, can you imagine like if you want, I don't know, someone to trade for you or, you know, to have like an advisor or something, you can actually, present your wallet without them ever having to know your name, you know, your age, your gender or anything. And I think that's really important because the technology itself sets us up to be a little bit less vulnerable. And then there's the thing of like being underbanked or unbanked, because I think women are like some 10 percentage points more likely to not have a bank account than men. And I think that that's like in various different cultures, religious reasons or, you know, all sorts of reasons that women are underprivileged, like the banking comes with that. And I think blockchain can actually help you because it doesn't discriminate, I guess, as long as you have internet access. And then there's a whole another issue. Like that's where the daisy chain comes in. And, you know, what are we going to do with this like
This is the interesting thing, because I remember talking with somebody who was very anti-crypto. And don't get me wrong, if you're anti-crypto for valid reasons, I totally get it. There
Yeah,
are
that's
problems
okay.
in crypto. Nothing's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
I start to get a little annoyed when people aren't anti-TradFi for the exact same things, because what I don't like is bias and hypocrisy, right? As a former federal prosecutor, I don't mind when people are, I'm happy when people are anti-crime, right? We should all be anti-crime. But it's very annoying when people who were in traditional finance, who worked in banks, who weren't really as upset about the crime that flowed through their institutions for years, are now suddenly just consumed with concern for crypto crime. And I'm like, to be clear, when these scams were flowing through you, I could barely get you to care about this. But now you want to start task forces and advisory boards on crypto crime. And I'm so glad that you're finally here to talk about crime, right? When you have a personal benefit in killing the competition. That's the level of hypocrisy and bias that really, really drives me crazy. And I think there's too much of it. Now, something that you said that was really interesting that I kind of want to go back to for a second. You said that the risk aspect, when you were thinking about your daughter, you were like, you don't like gambling. And I want to pick on that for one moment, because
I mean, that's okay. It's just, I wouldn't.
right, exactly. But here's the interesting thing. When I was younger and I was watching The Daily Show with I think it was Jon Stewart. I can't remember. It was some interview with the actress Olivia Munn, right? And she used to be a correspondent on The Daily Show. And she said that Jon Stewart gave her like the best career advice she'd ever gotten, which was, when you go all in on you, you win big. Like if you win big, right? And the thing about that translates into all of this is that women have a tendency to be hesitant more. And to your point, when they feel like something's gambling, even if it's on themselves, even if they're clearly the horse that's going to win, that should win, they're still hesitant when it feels like gambling. And it's a false assessment of the risk, right? And they're looking at all of the negative possibilities. Well, what if I lose this money? What if I don't get the job? Like, what if? And men tend to focus on but what if I win? Like, right? Like the odds of winning. And we assess the odds differently, in a lot of cases, not to our benefit. And I've seen this not just with crypto, I've seen it with career choices, where you'll see a guy, and it even goes to that statistic, where men will apply for a job checking like 4 out of the 10 boxes, and women will look at the 8 boxes they check and say, well, I don't have I don't have the 2, right? But it all goes to the risk calculation. The number of people I talk to who work at companies who are like, every man that applies for this job asks for the max salary cap, asks for more than the max salary cap. We can't even get the women to ask for the max salary cap.
Yeah.
Like, because they're afraid if they ask for the max salary cap, they won't get the job, right? Even though they know they're worth that. And so all of these things that we've been talking about, the common thread underneath, frankly, is addressing the societal conditioning that disincentivizes and discourages women from assessing risk in their favor. And that is killing us, whether it's crypto, whether it's investment, whether it's venture capital, whether it's jobs, every single thing.
And it's so global as well. This isn't a trend that's just in the US or it's just in some states that are, say highly, their religious or societal beliefs are basically trying to erase women for society. I don't want to get too political on this, but I do believe that there's places where that is happening. But yeah, it's just like, it's such a global problem, which to me is shocking. Like, living in such different societies, in such different conditions, women always get to this same moment where they're just like, oh, the odds will never be in my favor, when actually they could be. But that's where I think what's really telling is I was reading like a Gemini piece from 2021, and it was talking about maybe about a third of crypto holders are women, or like a quarter at this point, maybe, I don't know, somewhere there. But the finding was actually that more than 50% of women, more women were crypto curious of those that didn't already operate in the crypto blockchain world. They were more curious about it than the men who weren't already in it were. And I think that that's a little bit telling, because I think it's because we're searching for a way out of our current predicament on a global level. Like we're curious because like, oh, wait a second, maybe this could help me. Maybe I could use this because there's no one on the other side to stop me. We are hesitant and we seem to still be hesitating, but we are curious as well. And this is the really special thing I think this Gemini study found.
Well, and to go back to a point that you made earlier, that's like worth like foot stomping. Women are also, they tend to research more. Right.
Yeah.
And so you have this curiosity and you have this desire to research. And unfortunately, what crypto has had for too long is like a lack of honest brokers and education. Because if you're constantly saying that crypto is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and if you just look like a walking, talking pump and dump scheme, right? Like women look at that and they're just like, you know, the crypto bro culture and the shilling coins and all of that stuff, it reeks of a lack of nuanced, objective education. Now you have things like SheFi, Aave has Owl Explains, which I recommend to people all the time.
Owl Explains.
Oh my gosh, amazing website that explains like nearly every topic. The team at Aave put this together and it's absolutely incredible. You've got Clev Mesidor is the executive director of the Blockchain Foundation. This is the educational arm of the Blockchain Association, and she puts out all kinds of incredible educational things about trying to teach like crypto and digital asset literacy, like K through 12, right? So that kids who are digitally native are learning this stuff. But you see, like, and Dumpling, also a good example of this, right? There are a lot more honest brokers who want real talk in education so that you can make an educated decision, right? Because the problem with consumer protection is that it's fine if you're educating consumers and letting them make an educated decision. Just shutting stuff down and barring them from participating, or just shilling blindly and it's a bunch of false narratives that just get people to invest in crap coins, that's terrifying. And if women, I think when women can't find that, when they feel like they can't find honest broker education to be able to do their own research, that's when they're hesitant. And I think the rise in uptick in crypto, blockchain technologies, Web3, as they see more women in this space who are doing cool things. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there aren't women out there who aren't shilling crap coins and doing things that I probably wouldn't do and that my mother wouldn't be proud of. But we're not all perfect. Nobody's all heroes and all villains, right? But there is definitely an opportunity right now, I think, where if you're following the right people and you're looking for honest brokers, I think there are way more of them now, especially with a lot of people who have left government, who've left TradFi, who see the potential of the technology and are really doing their best to say, look, maybe, crap coin isn't the thing that makes it, but some form of cryptocurrency, zero knowledge proof, digital assets, digital identity. Like we are in the live wire Kazaa stage of this. What the Apple Music, Spotify is going to look like, we do not know. And if you just want to wait years and years and years for Apple Music, Spotify and hope it goes well, but if you want to be involved in ensuring that digital music survives, because in the United States, it's at real risk of moving overseas. If you want to be invested in it, if you want any of that benefit, doing some research now does definitely behoove you.
Yeah, behoove. What a lovely word.
The nerd in me comes out sometimes, and it's usually
I love
in the form of like unused words.
I'm gonna like write that down and use it in my next press release. You read that on CoinDesk next week, then you know it was me.
I love it.
Pushing my PR. So I think we can like move to like a bit of a bigger scale, because we've been talking a lot about women as individuals in the workforce and individuals as investors. But then there's a whole bigger narrative to this, right? And it's women in business and in venture capital, I guess, like investment in business, and women who as entrepreneurs starting their own business. And like basically less than 2% of like venture capital goes to female funded projects, like I think in the last year or whatever, which is abysmal. And it's not much better for like projects whose founding team included at least one or two women. Like it's still under 20%, which is still abysmal. This second one was from like a few years ago. Just putting that as a caveat to our listeners, because it's a little bit difficult to even get information on this. But how do we fix that? Like, how do we make VC better for women? Because we've got our our head of Nexo Ventures is a woman, Tatiana. She's amazing, and I love the project that she's invested in because I get to like converse with a lot of our companies that we're working with, and I don't know. I feel like having a woman at the head of a ventures company like that eliminates the bias to some extent. But what else?
This, if I knew the answer to this question, I would literally be making billions, because I think people are actually focusing on it right now in a way that they haven't before. And I'm a big believer that there are tipping points, like things that happen that actually get people to pay attention to something. I think, unfortunately, right now, foreign countries are doing it much better than the United States. Like I think in Ireland and the UK, seeing basically regulations being put in that require processes that try to undo unconscious bias, right? In the United States, you don't see the movement by the venture capital community, I haven't seen, to really make any substantive change. And in fact, for me, the tipping point was when it was reported that Adam Neumann, the founder of WeWork, I'm sure you heard this, after losing, I think, over $1 billion for investors in WeWork, was given another opportunity that I think was like $350 million by Andreessen Horowitz. And when confronted with the fact that they had funded, like, I think this much for women and people of color and this much for a failed white dude, like they were like, wow, we love people who, fail and come back to the table. There was no recognition. There was no acknowledgement of how offensive it was. There were op-eds that were written. It was like, this was such a slap in the face to women in venture, to women founders, to people of color. I think there was a stat that literally his one deal was more than like all people of color received either that year or I might be butchering these stats. So I would encourage you to go read the plethora of articles that were written, because I literally knew women in venture who were in tears when the news of that came out, because it was such a slap in the face. The number of women who are killing it, like one of my members, Lillian Fonte, former DEA agent, founded Cat Labs, right? And she's out there fundraising. And the idea that she gets asked by venture capitalists, well, how are you going to be a CEO and a mom? Like we did an entire podcast on this, the Women in Crypto podcast. The questions that some of these women still get in 2023, when people say, well, I don't think there's unconscious bias. I'm like, please just stop. I can see
that what you just said there doesn't even sound like unconscious bias. That sounds
that's
like conscious bias.
That's just
that's
right?
just next level.
Yeah. And this is the thing, is like, I concede that we have a pipeline problem. I had a venture capitalist who, like, off the record said to me, look, one of the big problems is if you have a room of 100 male founders and 10% of them have worthy companies, worthy things to invest in and are worth funding, that means 10 of them are going to get funded. If in that same room, there are 8 women at the same rate, assuming like 10% are, that's 0.8 of a woman. So when you just don't have that many,
of a woman.
Yeah, 0.8 of a woman.
Like
if
somewhere,
you just don't have
maybe
that many female founders, just statistically, it's going to be really hard to get the funding, right? Because unless each of those women is a perfect unicorn, like statistically, some of them are going to be average, right? Like, or slightly above average. The problem with that is there's a numbers problem. And this goes back to what you said at the beginning, where it's like, how do we build the pipelines for crypto technology, STEM? That's a societal problem that people like girls who code, girls in STEM, right? Like there are people who are trying to change that, but that's generational now. That's going to take so long to increase those pipelines. And the question of what is VC doing right now to try to get more money to women in the US, I personally feel like the venture capital community is not self-regulated. They're not trying. I have not seen that the venture capital community trying to regulate, or certainly not the whales in the venture capital community who with the snap of their finger and one deal could fund things, right? Like, I mean, some people
and it's
are
also like reputationally, there's some whales in the venture capital community where you see the startup that's funded by whoever, and that startup can skyrocket just based on reputation alone. Cause like I work that's my job as PR. Like I assess reputation, and I've seen so many things garner so much more information, so much more publicity just based on who's funding them, not even like what their actual product is. And I think that that's so important. And like it comes back to like I say that I think I said this in episode 1, like with Elon Musk, who texted the Bitcoin broken heart emoji and then the price dropped drastically and everything. Like people who have a big name need to realize the responsibility and the power they wield, and like they can make such a difference with something as easy as a tweet, as funding one company. Like you don't even need to put that much money into it. You can just use your name. It matters, and you need to be responsible in that way. And I think that's not happening. We're seeing the opposite happen.
Well, you could do an entire podcast episode on what type of personality makes it to that level, and are they the good, moral, ethical people that could do that conduct? So I'm gonna.
Wait, what was that statistic that like a lot of like really highly paid CEOs or something are sociopaths or psychopaths?
I was like, I'm not gonna say it. You can say it. Like I already get dinged for being like too spicy with my opinions all the time. So I'm not gonna disagree. I'm just gonna say noted and agreed. It's a stat. Statistics are statistics, right? But I do think one of the, the interesting thing about the venture capital problem is that this is where male allies are essential, because there are actually studies that have been done that have said when women are funded by female funders, like by female venture capitalists, it can actually hurt them in their subsequent rounds because of the perception that the only reason that they got the funding was female. And there's a really big venture capitalist in the crypto space, and she, raised a ton of money, and people are like, well, why isn't she giving it to women and she's not funding any women projects? Legitimate question. Like, I don't know, like what she's funded and what she hasn't. I think it's a legitimate question for any venture capitalist, right? What is your rate of funding women and people of color? You should be able to answer that and have a good justification for why it's so damn low. But at the same time, I don't think people actually recognize that some women founders will turn away female funders, or conversely, female funders will say, I should not be your lead. Like, they will have that honest conversation about, as much as we want to support each other, am I the best person to support you? Now, as terrible as it is to say, sometimes the best thing that a female venture capitalist can do is introduce a female founder to a male venture capitalist as their first lead founder, just to get around that bias. Then you want to, right? And this is where, like, I call them queen makers, right? This is where queen makers are so critical, because those people behind the scenes, we need more sponsors. I forget who said this to me recently. They were like, I'm so sick of mentorship, and I don't want to hear mentorship again. I don't need mentorship. I need sponsorship. I need somebody who's going to actually be intentionally inclusive, who's going to recognize my achievements, and who's going to put me in the place that I deserve to be, and who's going to help me get there. And that's sponsorship. So when we look at what's happening in venture capital, I think a huge part of the problem is a lack of, frankly, male venture capitalists who aren't looking at the situation and saying, how do I fix this? And I know some really, really great men in venture capital who are looking at it. I just don't think they're the majority. And when that tipping point happens, it's like the Me Too movement. It can overcorrect. I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but you need a tipping point to get everybody to say, this is not right. The Adam Newman thing was a start. But at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where something happens where people are like, okay, it's time to get our shit together. And we as venture capitalists have the keys to this castle, and we can fix this if we wanted to. And just right now, at least in the US, I don't see the will to do it. And I think some foreign countries are basically creating the will through regulation, and it's helping. It is absolutely helping. What Australia's doing, what Ireland's doing, you're seeing amazing things. There's a cool group in the US, How Women Invest, trying to get more women into venture capital. There's a lot of things that people are doing. I went to an Investor Summit that was trying to put money into female founders. So there's stuff out there. But I will tell you, when I was at the Investor Summit, and it was a room of like 150 women and one man, and the man was speaking on a panel, and he said, look, no offense, but I really would hope next year to see more men in the room if we're going to fix this. And all of us were like, yes. If a bunch of women, Tara actually said this on our first podcast. She was like, if a bunch of women just get together and complain about how bad it is for women, it's very difficult to change things.
Yeah.
If we can sit down with men, explain the situation, and get some male allies who empathize to help and sponsor us, now we're talking about real societal change.
I do this thing where I ask women who are, like, in my opinion, very successful in their lives. I ask them, what is the most important thing that you wish you knew when you were like younger in your career? So yeah, can I quickly ask you, what's the most important thing?
That I would never be able to get right where I would be in 5 years, and I should have stopped trying. And if I had just earlier on said, I'm going to give this thing that I'm doing 110%, and I'm just going to make meaningful connections with everybody that I meet along the way, it will all work out the way that it's supposed to. And as soon as I started doing that, my life trajectory went like that. And if I had
Oh, wow.
started it
Okay.
sooner, it would have been like this. As it was like this. But the single biggest thing that changed was stop giving a shit about what other people think and what choices they would make and what they would do. Give 110% and make the choice that you want to do and literally ignore everyone else. Do you know how many people give me shit for starting a nonprofit coming off the January 6th committee? Every single one of my colleagues is making probably between $500 to $1.5 million at law firms. And I went and self-funded and started a nonprofit that I right now can't draw a salary from. And I do advising work to cover my bills. The number of people who give me shit for that life choice is staggering. I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. I love what I'm doing. I feel like I actually make a difference in women's lives. And you know what? I was really lucky that I was a compulsive saver when I was younger. And for 1 year, I can gamble on me and do the thing that I love and live off my savings and fuck everyone else. And most of those comments come from a dissatisfaction with their own life choices, which is why you have to go all in on you and ignore everybody else. Everybody else. Everybody who thinks that they know you and your life choices better than you. Even I'm really close with my dad. I love him all the time. But every time he calls and he's like, do you know how much money you could be making at a law firm? I'm like, I love you, but I'm not having this conversation with you. Like, I'm happy. I'm doing what makes me happy. And the problem is, and this isn't a woman thing. This is 99% of the United States.
It's a person thing. Keeping
up with the Joneses means you give a shit about the Joneses. If everybody stopped giving a shit about the Joneses, God, we'd be so much happier. We'd be so much happier. So I want you to think right now, you have the edge of being at or above the level that I was and knowing now what I didn't know, which means that by 42, you will have lapped me in your career, right?
I needed to write at least some of that down. I'm like nervous I forgot some of it along the way, but I think I got the two main point in my head. Oh, I have one last theory to add to like the venture capital kind of, I guess, section of this podcast. And it's because I feel like I was reading, this was something I read really randomly through one of the newsletters I get. And it was about being emotional and passionate about something and how that gets perceived in serious situations, like in court or when you're pitching your project or whatever as a founder to a venture capitalist. And I think it was a paper by, I'm going to butcher this because I think it was Arizona State University, but I may have gotten it wrong. It was definitely a university in Arizona. And it was about how when men get angry or emotional when they're trying to make a point, they're perceived as more passionate, more confident, more sure in their point, and more correct. Whereas when a woman shows that kind of emotion, especially if it's anger, but it can be any emotion, I guess, she's perceived as like rather hysterical, rather that her point is not logical and rooted in evidence, it's rooted in emotion, so therefore it should be dismissed. And I think that probably also makes it different, and that's like this larger societal problem where we're judging women and men differently based on their emotions. Like everything that you do as a woman, if you do exactly what a man does, you will probably not succeed. You will probably get it ass backwards wrong and get rejected. So I think it's also about finding where women are strong, which kind of leads me to my last question, which is really important to me personally. Like, what do you think is women's biggest strength right now in the crypto world, in the blockchain space?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Because we talk about the weaknesses, right? We've been talking about like all the weak points. What are our strengths?
Well, I say it's tough because I actually think there's several and it's hard to pick. So let me do like a top 3. Okay?
Give me all of them. Yeah.
I honestly think there's several. But the first one is I really do think that we are very good at identifying risk, right? And flagging risk and seeing risks. Like the number of things like that, especially when I was a chief of legal affairs, seeing risk in a certain way that some folks just, they don't even see the landmines. They don't even realize they're in a field of landmines. So I think risk identification and the way that women do that is frankly one of the biggest strengths, because right now in a nascent industry that's trying to mature, accurately identifying risks and then and trying to figure out strategies for how much mitigation is really, really essential. I think the other thing that's super important is that women, frankly, I think are stronger at EQ, right? Like a lot of the women, like a lot of the companies right now in the crypto blockchain industry, if you're looking on Glassdoor, if you're talking to people on the DL, like in terms of like who's happiest, a lot of them are women-run companies. They care about culture. And let me be, here's where I put a big asterisk, because I think we do a disservice. And Lillian Fonte said this on our podcast, and it stuck with me over time. We need to be really careful about generalizations about women do this and men do this, right? Because the truth is that these are traits, right? Risk identification for some reason is a trait that I think is statistically significant in women. When you get to women-led companies, frankly, there are men-led companies, but the traits of empathy, caring, community building, team building, statistically, they tend to be more common, right, in women, I think. They're not characteristics that are female or male. There are amazing male CEOs who care, are super warm, right? They have all the traits that are necessary to build a corporate culture that is inclusive and respectful, right? I will say statistically, I think some of those traits, women are encouraged more, right? So like, I think one of their strengths
we're just conditioned to behave that way.
And in a industry that is thirsting for productive leadership, because I think a large part of crypto's problem right now is what got you here won't get you there. And when that happens at a lot of companies at the same time in one industry where there hasn't been a transition of the folks who started it into the folks who are going to carry it into maturity, that's really hard. And you see some of these women rising up at companies who are phenomenal voices, right? Like I think of Lindsay at TaxBit, right? Simone at Elliptic, and I'm forgetting the woman at Bitwave, but like you see these women leaders, right? Who are like really taking over and changing cultures and bringing them into like the next stage of like, yes, this is incredible. Yes, we need to move fast and break things, but let's understand the cost of what we're breaking. We need to be objective about that and decide, should we break it? Not just could we break it? And then I think the other women's biggest strength is frankly, we are community builders, and blockchain and crypto is this amazing community, like globally, like you said this earlier, but like, it can't be said enough. It's a global community. And if you get out there and you start connecting with people, I don't care if it's like through LinkedIn, conferences, our association, when you start to connect on that global level and talk to people in other countries, globalization is happening at a pace that I think a lot of people aren't aware of and aren't seeing. Young people are, but like older people aren't. And I think women are really good community builders. And with something so global, I think they're talking to their counterparts in foreign countries, foreign regions. They're, mapping out like what's happening in this country. Should my company go to this country? Like who has the better regulatory framework? I just think women have been conditioned in some ways to be really good community builders, and crypto and blockchain are an industry that is so facilitative of that. So I think those are the big three. There's many. Women are great. We could be better, but like women are generally pretty great.
I think we should end on that note. Women are great. So let's have more of them in crypto. And I think we can wrap up on that note. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being here with us today. Is there anything that you want to say before we go off?
Oh, just a huge thank you for finding me and having me, and all of the really cool work that you're doing on this podcast, putting education out there. It's super valuable. And I think it really helps the industry. So thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. It was an honor for me. So thanks for listening, guys. If you got all the way here, I'm really proud of you. And I'm assuming you're probably either a woman or an ally of women in crypto. So thanks very much. And I'll see you next time on The Social Block.